linguists and teachers sometimes, and anybody really, but linguists mainly. And so I think the first and the most important thing about linguistics is that it gives you a factual basis for what it is you are going to teach. And this task is becoming increasingly difficult, which is why one needs to have an applied linguistic perspective all the time. Why is it becoming more difficult? For a number of reasons. The first one is the situation we're in now. Um, Once upon a time, it was so easy. There was speech and there was writing, and we all knew where we were. And now there is electronic communication. And all the stuff that is your generation now, I'm talking to, of course, you are native speakers of the internet. I am not. I learned the internet as a foreign language at my age, and you are native speakers of it. And therefore, you are already developing new styles, new usages, new idioms, new vocabulary, new methods of interaction that is not part of traditional spoken and written language. Now, to some extent, you are ahead of me in English in this respect, because I do not use all the varieties of English that are out there on the internet these days. Uh, for example, I have never ticked or talked. I have no idea what is going on in TikTok. It's not my world. It's your world, perhaps, but not mine. So there are areas where I cannot say what is happening, but you would be able to say if there's anything interesting, new developments that are happening there. So, so the whole area of the internet is providing language with a new dimension of richness, which has to be brought into the classroom because the younger students of today, that is their world. That is the first thing. And then the second reason why one needs a linguistic perspective is to keep in touch with as you've already mentioned, the global varieties of English that are taking place around the world. This is the other big change in the last 30 or 40 years, that English has become not just a global language, because that was happening for quite some time, a global lingua franca. It is becoming a diverse global lingua franca. And by diverse, I mean that the different Englishes, you're aware of the new plural that came in a few years ago. We don't talk about global English so much as global Englishes, plural, because of all these varieties that are developing. Again, once upon a time, it was so simple. There was British English and there was American English, and we all knew where we were. And now today, there is Australian English and Indian English and Singaporean English and Ghanaian English, and altogether about 40 or 50 varieties of English around the world. Now, how many of them do you need to know? Well, hardly any. Of course, in your part of the world, American English and British English are the critical ones. But in your part of the world, maybe the varieties that are developing in the Caribbean are important for you. Or some of the more southern varieties of American English, or the English that has developed in places like Mexico or even in Brazil. And then, because the internet is offering you an opportunity of being in touch with anywhere in the world, what are your favorite sites? Where do you go to? It might be that you go to Australia on the internet, in which case you will encounter Australian English. You might go to South Africa, and so it goes on. So the other big thing about applied linguistics is that it is trying to keep pace with the emerging Englishes that exist around the world, and to present information about the distinctiveness of these varieties, the differences of these varieties, Where do you read this sort of thing? There are journals now that look at this a lot. I don't know whether you know the journal English Today or the journal English Worldwide. Now, these are
All
journals
right.
that provide the research reports that exist about these newly developing varieties of English. And so,
Perfect.
this is the perspective, I think, within which a teacher has to say, right, this is the new linguistic world. How much of it am I going to present to my students? How much of it will I expect my students to present to me? Because after all, I don't know how many hours a week, Alexander, you and your colleagues have with a group of students, and how much English can you present to them in that time compared to when they are out of class, online, encountering English and other languages too, on their mobile phones and on the computers and everything. So that there has to be a kind of two-way interaction, it seems to me these days, between what the teacher can inform about English and what the students can actually bring to the classroom. I haven't done this recently, but I remember once going into a class and I was observing, because I am not a teacher like you, I am a linguistic observer. And I remember the teacher, one of the students said, yesterday, teacher, you were telling us about this piece of English, and it was so-and-so. On the internet last night, I heard somebody doing something different. What should it be? And what had happened was that the rule that was in the grammar books was one thing, and the usage that the student had heard on the internet was another. And so here was a good example of the student bringing into the classroom the different kinds of English that exist in the real world, and the textbook wasn't really good enough to handle all that variation. So I think, there's a huge amount of interaction taking place these days that didn't take place before. One other thing, before I end this long answer to your short question, and that is that don't forget the difference between production and comprehension here. When one is teaching a language, one is teaching both production and comprehension. Production in the sense of speaking and writing, comprehension in the sense of listening and reading. Now, all this variation that's out there is primarily a matter of listening comprehension and reading comprehension. Nobody is suggesting that students should use all this in their day-to-day. Whatever variety of English you are teaching, whether it is British English or American English, whichever accent of English you are teaching, you will carry on doing that in production because that is the way it can be. And it's a perfectly good variety of English to teach. But as far as listening comprehension is concerned, I know many teachers around the world now are spending, as it were, half their class on production and the other half on listening comprehension. Because the one thing you can guarantee is this: whatever variety you teach, when you go out into the streets or onto the internet, you will hear lots of other varieties as well. So let me pause there.
Just a very clear view you're giving us now as future English teachers of a foreign language. However, days ago, I was reflecting upon what are the reasons I am teaching a foreign language without no close context. I can feel that need. From one side, I will explain to my students, applied linguistics is concerned with the social interaction and language to solve some sort of problems, let's say. On the other hand, linguistics applied focus mainly on theories to be tested, being analyzed in order to see how they're going to interact with the social problems that they are not inside, the linguistic applied affairs. I mean, social context is not something relevant, but linguistics theories does. So, how to deal between the concerns of I need to be more English teacher, or maybe I need to be more applied linguist thinker, let's say it in some way, just to analyze the context, the purpose, the production, and the elements. They are going to be really meaningful for those who are receiving my teaching performance.
Well, I think the distinction that you make between linguistic theory and the practical teaching situation is only true to a certain extent, because don't forget, there's more to linguistics than Chomsky, as it were. There's more to linguistics than linguistic theory. Remember that linguistic theory is what linguists are trying to do, what Chomsky and the others are trying to do, is develop a theory for all the languages in the world, not just English. Chomsky is not interested in teaching English. He doesn't care about that. He is concerned to find out what all human languages are like, what are the common features inside all human languages, what differentiates them. He isn't concerned about teaching. Now, in order to use linguistics, you have to go to the branches of linguistics which actually are concerned with context and teaching and so on. And these are branches like sociolinguistics and psycholinguistics and pragmatics. Now, let's just have a quick look at a couple of those. I mean, sociolinguistics is the study of language in social situations. So it relates to things like the formality of a situation, formal English versus informal English. This is something you've got to know about in a classroom context, because if you mix up formal and informal English, things can go horribly wrong. So you have to know the difference between the two. It also relates to things like gender, male and female speech, and these days, of course, all the intermediate categories that exist out there in relation to gender. It deals with things like race. It deals with things like age, with things like occupation, the different varieties of English that relate to the different occupations, whether you are a journalist or a sports commentator or a lawyer or a priest or whoever. Sociolinguistics bridges that kind of gap, and that is an important perspective. I think any applied linguist working in the teaching world has to have a sociolinguistic mindset all the time. And then there is the other very important subject of pragmatics. Now, is this a subject that you've dealt with at all in class, Alexander, or shall I go into that a bit?
Excuse me, Professor, once again.
Pragmatics. Is this a perspective that you use? I mean, for me, pragmatics is the most important aspect of linguistics. What is pragmatics? Well, you know the word pragmatic. If I say John is a very pragmatic person, what do I mean? I mean, he's a person who is very flexible, who behaves one way in one situation, and then he can adapt himself to speak in a different way and behave in a different way in another situation. The opposite of pragmatic is dogmatic. If you are a dogmatic person, you always behave in the same way. Pragmatics means be flexible, be cool, in other words. Now, the situation in language is like this. If you're being pragmatic about language, you are studying the situations in which language appears and try to understand exactly what is going on. Pragmatics is the study of the choices you make when you use language, the choices you make. So shall I speak like this, or shall I speak like that? Shall I write like this, or shall I write like that? Shall I use this word, or shall I use that word? Shall I use this style or that style? Pragmatics studies the choices you make, the reasons for your choices, and the effects that the choices convey. I'll say that again because that is the definition of pragmatics. Pragmatics is the study of the choices you make when you use language, the reasons for your choices, and the effects that the choices convey. Now, in other words, pragmatics tries to find explanations, tries to find reasons for why we use language in the way we do. Now, in the context of the classroom, you are actually using pragmatics all the time, sometimes without realizing it. Imagine this. A student, one of you guys, writes a piece of work for Alexander here, and he corrects it, and he puts a correction in the margin or underneath your writing. What has happened? You have chosen to write in a certain way. Your reasons are in your mind. That's why you've written. The effect, however, is unfortunate because it's wrong. Alexander now will correct it. In other words, he will correct the effect of your poor writing in this particular case. So we are always thinking pragmatically about language when we are correcting work or now in just the everyday situation. Let me give you an example of a piece of bad pragmatics. Bad pragmatics. The other day, I was sitting here in this room and the telephone rings. And I pick up the telephone and a voice at the other end says, "Hello, is that David?" And I say, "Yes." And the voice at the other end says, "You don't know me, but..." And then the voice at the other end tries to sell me some insurance. And that's bad pragmatics, to use my first name when he doesn't know me. He immediately put me off. I immediately was irritated. I immediately wanted to put the phone down and not listen to him anymore. He thought he was doing the right thing by calling me by my first name. That is not the accepted pragmatic convention for British English. It might be more common in American English, actually. A lot of Americans go on to first name terms very quickly, but in Britain, we don't do that so much. You know, the British are a little bit more reserved in that respect. So you see what I mean? A pragmatic choice can be wrong. And it's the same on the internet, guys. I mean, when you go on to social media, whatever you're using, Facebook, Twitter, whatever it is these days, you know very well that there are certain conventions, certain ways of appearing on those media, which are accepted by everybody. And if you break those conventions, you can get trolled, you can get into trouble. Somebody will start criticizing you for the kind of language you're using. Or to take one more example, any interaction has certain, what shall I call them, norms, certain expectations. I'm talking to you now. I am not using any English swear words. I am not swearing. Does that mean I don't know how to swear? I do know how to swear. I've got some very good swearing vocabulary in my head, but it would not be appropriate to use such words in an interview situation like this. Now, I know people who are so unaware of the pragmatic situation that they might easily say something, drop a swear word in, make some remark about gender or whatever it might be, and upset the people they are talking to. So this is what pragmatics does. It provides an overall perspective for the way in which you are presenting a language, whether it's in everyday conversation or whether it's in a teaching situation. So a pragmatic perspective is very, very important. And that plus sociolinguistics provides the bridge, I think, between the theory you mentioned earlier and the pedagogy in the classroom.
Very interesting. Yes, it is. Undoubtedly, uh, this is something that future teachers have to recognize. Something that has worried me is perhaps they do not have clear mindset about the importance of pragmatics and social linguistics at first, and they are not, let's say, well known. They do not recognize essentially the importance of being inside a classroom setting when teaching the language.
Yeah.
So, of course, it's quite important. Professor Crystal, we wanted to finish. This is for, I would like you to give us some recommendations for future teachers of a foreign language, understanding that we are not going to be into a second language atmosphere. What are the recommendations that future teachers have to have in mind in order to excel their teaching um, development, to have a meaningful learning process in children and teenagers?
Yeah, well, this is a difficult question for me because remember, I am not a teacher in the sense like you are. I have never taught in a classroom like you are doing now. I have been into classrooms as an observer and watched what teachers do. So all I can tell you is what I have seen. And what I see these days is an increasing tolerance of diversity, which is really what we've just been talking about in another way. This is what I mean. Let's take the question of accent. We have all got an accent. I have got an accent, you have got an accent. You are speaking English with an accent. I am speaking English with an accent. Do you guys feel that your accent is something you should be ashamed of, or something you want to improve, that your accent is not very good or something like that? An awful lot of people do. For me, as long as you are intelligible, I do not care what accent you have. In fact, I delight in listening to the range of the world's accents in English. It's amazing how many people around the world are ashamed of their accent because they do not sound like a native speaker. My question is, why would you want to sound like a native speaker? You are not a native speaker. You are a foreign learner of English. I want you to sound foreign, so long as you are intelligible. I want you to be proud of your accent. You speak, all of you, I suppose, with a Colombian Spanish accent. That is great. That's one. Nobody else speaks quite like you. I use this analogy. I go into a garden full of flowers. If there is only one kind of flower in that garden, it is a boring garden. If I go into a garden and there are many different kinds of flowers in it, it's a lovely garden. It is the same with accents. If there were just one accent in the world, it would be awful. How terrible. If there are many accents, it's wonderful. So long as you are intelligible, be proud of your local accent and don't try to change it too much to be like some imagined American speaker or British speaker or Australian speaker or what have you. Be yourself. And that is the message I find an awful lot of teachers are taking on board these days, that they shouldn't be too extreme in their readiness to change the accents of the students that they are teaching. And that's one point that I've noticed, a big change from 20 years ago, when 20 years ago, the model was, yes, become as much like a native speaker as possible. So that's one thing I've noticed. Probably others.
Perfect. Perfect. Professor Crystal, I really thank you for your time. I really thank you for your talk. Hopefully, we'll meet once again. Uh, Perhaps in a couple of months, I will contact you once again because we will have a congress, an international congress in the Amazon region. Perhaps we can be another guest from us invited virtually. We would like to, you can be on site, but we know that sometimes it's quite difficult. But at least virtually, we will be really pleased to have you once again.
Well,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much, Alexander. Yes, it has to be virtual these days. I can't fly anymore because of a ear problem that I've got. So my first visit to Cartagena was the last, it seems, and I don't think I shall ever get to see your part of the world. But I wish you all well, good luck with your studies and your next career and all the rest of it. I hope you have a great time and thank you for your interest. And it's been a pleasure to be a small part of your world just for half an hour or so this afternoon. Well, this afternoon for me, it's still morning for you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Well, Professor Crystal, thank you very much. And well,
Okay.
hopefully we will have a time for you again.
Yeah, good for you. Right. Thanks a lot, guys. Take care.
Thank
And
you.
bye-bye. Take care.
Okay, goodbye.
Stay safe.
Thank you.